Adjusting to life after escaping King Creole wasn't easy. Not easy at all. Wearing normal clothes and not my suit felt strange, like it was something wrong I shouldn't be doing. It was like I was an abused puppy getting used to life in a new loving home. I didn't trust anything at first, but soon enough, I started getting used to things and eventually figured out some things about myself. The first thing is the fact that while I don't have to eat or sleep, my body is capable of doing them. Eating is a challenge as food and drinks tend to leak out on my stitched up neck. My parents have thought it best to keep me hidden from the outside world. Not that I'm complaining. People aren't exactly going to be very happy when they see what I look like. Although it did lead to some fun exchange with the police. See, they found my dad's Zippo lighter in the charred remains of old King Creole's half-price voodoo store, and they soon paid a visit to my parents' house. I listened in from my spot in the living room and soon heard the conversation. "You're under arrest for the crime of arson," the head cop declared, twisting my dad around and slapping the cuffs on him. He protested, thrashing around while my mom pleaded and begged to let him go. Clenching my fists, I walked out from the living room and into the view of the police. "Let him go," I said, walking over to them. The cops each looked at each other in confusion, clearly having thought me burned to a crisp in the blaze that had consumed their darling King Creole. "I know about your deal with Creole, and let's just say I've got a good witness to let the press know why the missing people in this town aren't investigated," I threatened, crossing my arms and staring at them with my button eyes. Each cop looked like they were about to shit themselves as they quickly uncuffed my dad and retreated from the door. Their hands held up as I approached them and slammed the door in their faces. Looking back at my parents and confused by their scared expression. "I'll explain later." That was all I said. And I would, when I myself had more answers to them. To date, I'm still not convinced that King Creole died in that blaze that consumed the voodoo shop. If my dreams, and the fact that I swear I see him from time to time, are any indication that the old voodoo bastard is still alive, I don't know what is. I've gotten in the habit of talking with Olivia and her mother Alexandra for advice, seeing as Alexandra is the last living person that I still have a connection to from the voodoo shop. I run a lot of ideas past her. Today, I braved the outside world, dressed up in my old hoodie with the hood up, and made my way over to their house, making sure to keep my buttons on the lookout for Creole. Wherever he might be, I know for a fact he isn't exactly happy that I torched his business. Making it safely to the small house the two lived in, I rang the bell, and Olivia ran out to give me a hug like she always did. "You're here! Can we play checkers?" she asked me, as her little arms kept themselves around me as I let myself in. I smiled and patted her head. Something about how innocent and sweet she is always recharged my body. "I'll see if I have time. Now, where's your mommy?" I asked her, to which she smiled and let go of my waist. Taking my hand, she led me to the living room, where Alexander was reading over a pile of books. And when I say a pile, I say it was stacked from the floor up to the armrests that the chair had. "Catching up on world history?" I asked, as Olivia went off to keep herself entertained. "No, I have Netflix for that," she said, looking at me as she sighed and put the books she was reading down. Alexandra had been turned into a voodoo doll all the way back in 1927, so she was having some trouble adapting to all the new things that had happened since. When we were told we had a man on the moon and Britain no longer had an empire, she nearly fainted. But she'd gotten used to a lot of the new technology like TV and cell phones. "I'm looking for a way to change you back," she said with an exhausted sigh. "Any luck? The internet hasn't exactly been much help. Either they want me to contact some voodoo gods or use a Ouija board or something." I sighed, sitting on the couch from across her, picking up one of her books and raising a brow. "Voodoo for dummies?" I asked with a chuckle. "Do not mock the knowledge of literature, Travis. And I do have a lead for you, in regards to King Creole's mother," she said, looking around the mess of books on the floor, tapping her lips with her fingers as she looked for the correct book, finding it after a few seconds and opening it up. "Here, Mama Creole. She's buried in a cemetery a few miles outside of town," she said, offering me the book to look into. I grunted as I stood up and took the book from her, looking down at the text and reading the passage. It definitely was Creel's mother, as it mentioned her as the mother of the long-deceased Charles Sumner. While this was good information, I was more confused as what this had to do with my current situation. What? Want me to dig her up and have a nice conversation? I asked skeptically, only for my shins to be kicked by her. Okay, I kinda deserved that. Try doing a seance to contact her, Alexandra explained, handing me a slim pamphlet from the stack of books next to her. Pouting as I took the item, I looked down at it with a skeptical brow raised. Then again, if my current situation is anything to go off of, I really should start believing that things I used to believe were fake are very much real. Be extremely respectful. Voodoo spirits can be very unpredictable. I'm sure you know that well, she said with a soft smile. I responded with a chuckle and I closed the book. She then handed me some candles and a lighter, supplies from my seance. I'm sure you both know that, I responded, looking down at the pamphlet and nodding to her. Olivia came back with a doll of her old mother in her arms, coming over and hugging me just before I left. She seems to really like me, kinda like an older brother. It's sweet, and I do show my care for her as well. Bidding them goodbye, I pulled the hoodie back over my head and googling where the cemetery would be. Luckily enough, it was within walking distance of the voodoo shop. Texting my parents and saying I would be out for a bit, receiving pleas not to be out too long. I promised them and went on my way. Walking into the old part of town, I stopped at the burnt-out remains of the voodoo store. It was blocked off by police tape, but I easily stepped over it and entered the charred remains. I looked around at the barely recognizable store, stepping over soot and creaking wood. The big pile of ash on the floor was most likely where I lit the voodoo doll on fire. Hearing a crunching sound, I looked down at my feet and saw a few pieces of porcelain, and my heart sank right through the floor. Damn it, I sighed hard, leaning down and picking up the pieces and looking around for any more of them. But all I could find was those few shards of Mary. Her death tore me in many ways. She was finally free from Creel's abuse and her torture, but her manner of death really hurt me. But as long as she's finally free, I guess I shouldn't be too sad for her. Putting the porcelain shards on the shard counter I used to stand and sleep behind, I looked around one last time before heading my way towards the cemetery. Alexander had failed to say that the cemetery was abandoned and overgrown to shit. Even the gate had dying vines, and I had to tug with all my strength to get the rusty gate open. Sighing in annoyance, I looked around the old cemetery and started to walk around, trying to find any indication of where Charles's mother was buried. "Help you, son?" a nasally voice asked me. Now to say I nearly shit myself is an understatement. Who the hell expects a person to suddenly ask a question in an abandoned cemetery? Spinning on my heels, I turned my button eyes to see a tall black man in a top hat standing in a grave and leaning on a shovel. A big brown cigar in his mouth, and he smiled at me. "The fuck is wrong with you, son? I asked you a question," he said, smoke blowing out of his nose. I stammered, looking around and putting my hood down, cautiously coming over to the strange man who was billowing smoke like a chimney. I'm looking for a grave." "There's one. One over there, another one over there," he snickered as he pointed to graves in every direction. He raised his brows at me to see if I was satisfied with his response. He seemingly didn't give a shit about my button eyes. Then again, I figured that he was some kind of voodoo person with his getup. "Mama Creel, her grave." At that name, the man stood up, his eyes big and wide as he climbed out of the grave and blew smoke right in my face, and it caused me to wave the smoke out of my face. "Mama Creel, huh? Haven't heard that name in many, many years. The fuck you gonna do with her grave?" he asked me, getting right in my face. I'm so happy my sense of smell and taste is still gone from being turned into a puppet. Just by looking at him, I could tell he must have stunk. "I want to do a seance," I responded, tapping my button eye with my finger. "See if she can help me with this." I explained to the man. He took a good look at me, finger taking the cigar out of his mouth and nodding as he rubbed his chin. Yeah, I've seen shitty work like this before, he said, standing back and blowing out more of his smoke and chuckling. His voice was high and nasally. A grave is behind you, 6 rows back. Can't miss it. It's got a big old statue of an angel on it. He pointed, causing my head to turn and look over. And when I turned to thank him, he had up and vanished on me. Stupid voodoo people, getting to teleport and shit. Making my way through the overgrowth and gravestones, I did indeed come upon a giant angel statue. Guess King Creole wanted to make sure his mom was remembered alright. Scraping off the moss, I was greeted by the words, Mama Creole. So this was her grave. Kneeling down before it, I put out the candles that Alexander had given me and carefully lit them. Didn't want to start a fire in this place. Alright, let's see if this'll work. I sighed, kneeling on my knees and sighing. Mama Creole, my name is Travis. Your son has given me a voodoo curse, and I humbly beg for you to lift it, if you can. I looked at the grave, expecting something to happen. The candles flickered a bit, but other than that, not much else happened. Figured this wouldn't work either, I said, about to give up, until a rotting hand shot through the ground and grabbed me by the arm. Now that did get a loud scream out of me, as the hand yanked me down, as if to pulling itself up, and sure enough, a worm-infested skull burst through the ground and met my button eyes, keeping me in a death grip, and pulling itself until it was about waist deep in the dirt. The corpse finally let me go. Standing up, I tumbled backwards against the grave behind me and stared at the corpse. How can I help you, dear? The corpse asked me in a sweet and caring voice. Now that really threw me off. I know they say don't judge a book by its cover, but when the cover is rotting and full of worms, I probably wouldn't read that book. Mama Creole? I asked hesitantly, getting a nod from the corpse. Some of its maggots fell to the ground as it did so. Well, I had my answer. I was currently talking to King Creole's mother. I need your help, I said after sitting back up from my backward tumble. Obviously, dear. You don't just call on me if you have nothing to chat about. She giggled, waiting for me to get over the fact I was talking to a corpse. Still not the weirdest thing that's happened to me, if I'm being really honest with myself. Your son Charles, he cursed me. Well, really he murdered me, then brought me back to life to be his puppet. Is there any way for you to reverse it? I asked her, looking into those vacant eye holes and tried to get any kind of idea what she was going to say, and it wasn't what I was expecting. Oh, you're that Travis, she said in a disgusted tone, pulling herself further out of her grave, clutching my arm again and pulling me back into her face. The same Travis that dared to hurt my darling boy? She hissed, opening her jaw up and leaning in to bite me. He tried to kill my parents, I shouted back at her, pushing her moldy corpse and trying to keep her away from me. Why does this always happen to me? I really should have gone to college instead of taking this stupid voodoo job. He's out of control and killing innocent people, I shouted, still struggling with the surprisingly strong corpse. He was teaching you a lesson, you ungrateful puppet, she snarled, taking a bite on my arm. Luckily her teeth didn't get through thanks to my hoodie sleeve. Looking around for a weapon, I grabbed one of the candles and shoved it in her face. The sizzling of her rotting face was enough to get her to let me go. I quickly blew out both candles and soon enough, she was seemingly dragged back into her grave by some unseen force, hurling every insult known to man at me. So much for her being able to help me. Should have figured the woman who created King Creole, in both senses of the word, would stand by him no matter what he did. Well, now I was back to square one, packing up the things I came with. I quickly got out of there and started on my way home. Being sure to avoid the voodoo shop this time. Making it home, I skipped on eating and just went out to my room, plopping myself onto my bed with a loud and annoyed groan. I would have passed out if someone hadn't started pulling at my hair. Yes, Tempe? I asked in an annoyed groan, turning my head to look at the voodoo doll. He waved his little arms at me and held up a scrap of paper. He was learning how to write better and must have been reading the alphabet books my mom used to get me when I was in kindergarten. Sighing as I sat up in the bed, I took the little scrap of paper and read it. Basement. Something down? Okay, maybe he still isn't the best at riding, but hey, he's getting there at least. I looked at him confused, thinking at first that he meant my basement. And then it clicked, and I remembered the store's basement door. I looked over at the desk where I had put the basement door key, and then I looked back at him. If he's down there and causes my death, I'm going to be so pissed at you, I declared at my little template friend, getting out of my bed and taking the key and shoving it in my pocket. Once again telling my parents I was going out. And this time I didn't say I was going to the voodoo shop. They'd lock me in my room if I told them that's where I was going. Pulling my hood over my head and heading off towards the voodoo shop, I was having second thoughts about this. And they got worse when I once again ducked under the police tape and entered into the burnt out shell of a shop. Swallowing a lump in my throat, I approached the scorched basement door, producing the key from my pocket and inserting it into the keyhole and opening up the door. It was as dark and endless as it always was. Producing my phone and walking into the darkness, I held my breath the entire way down. The stairs were spared from the flames that engulfed the store, most likely thanks to the door, so I didn't have to worry about falling through them. Although when I finally touched solid stone, I stood there for a solid minute, too afraid to move a muscle. Come on, Travis. You got this, man. My weak attempt at a pep talk did manage to walk a few steps as I looked around the basement. And to my surprise, the entire basement was empty. No bodies, no table where I got my head cut off, no nothing. I was kinda disappointed, really. I half expected all those corpses that dragged Creel away to still be down here. Slightly bolstered, I walked my way deeper into the basement to look around for something. There had to be a reason Tempe had sent me down here. And I tripped over it. Landing flat on my face with a hard thud, I looked at what had caused me to trip. Creel's cane. That really caused me to have some traumatic flashbacks. Getting beaten by that thing on nearly a daily basis still caused me to wake up and expect the pain to come to me. It was Creel's favorite way of getting me up from behind the counter. Sitting up, I reached out and grabbed the item. Rubbing the white head of it and sighing, I used it to help me get back up. You found my cane, an all too familiar voice said to me, causing me to freeze in place and clutch the item in my hand for dear life. Turning around, my fears were confirmed when I saw him sitting in the same comfy chair I'd been seeing in my dreams. Be a good boy and bring me the cane, Travis, he hummed, beckoning me to come over. I took backward steps and turned to run, only to slam into the stone wall that suddenly was behind me. You can't do this to me! You're dead! I shouted at him, lifting the cane up and ready to smack him in his stupid smiling face. He chuckled at me and stood up from the chair. The wall suddenly started to push me towards the Voodoo King. I've died before. I'll most likely die again. But as long as I have a way back, I'll never let you go, Travis. You belong to me. He said sweetly, like the tone of a parent saying they aren't mad, just disappointed. Soon the wall had pushed me all the way to him and he grabbed me by the throat. Easily he caught my futile attempt at hitting him with a cane and he yanked it from my hands. You've got one important thing, I choked out as he strangled me. He looked at me with some confusion before I rammed my head into his, causing him to grunt and fall backwards against his chair. Reaching down, I picked up the cane he had dropped and swung it against him, hitting him in the head and lifting the cane up to do it again. You don't have control over me, I huffed, lifting up the cane higher to do it again, until I felt something wrap around my arm. Don't I? He asked with a chuckle, spitting out some of the black sludge from his mouth. I looked up in horror as the strings began to descend onto me. This couldn't be happening. I janked my arm against the strings and tried to break it. I even tried chewing through the fucking thing. Soon another string came and wrapped itself around my other arm. Pulling both arms, I was forced to dangle a couple of inches from the floor. Mama told me that you visited her, he said with a chuckle, getting off the floor and dusting himself off. He stood and picked up his cane I had dropped and marveled at it with some appreciation. Yeah, she looked almost as ugly as you, I shot back, receiving a hard smack from the cane against my face. I don't even know why I said that. I guess I was just pissed off at ending up in this situation again. I must teach you some manners, since your parents clearly didn't, he chuckled, lifting his cane up to smack me again. only for him to be grabbed by the shoulder. We both looked to the hand in confusion. Only Creel was spun around and decked right in the face, sending him flying into me and falling to the floor. Whatever had just hit Creel stepped out into my field of view and instantly melted my heart. "Mary!" I called out. Mary appeared to me as she looked when Creel had forced her to sing on stage. She smiled at me and shook her head. "Part of your master plan, huh?" she asked me, coming over and cutting me down from my string captors. Rubbing my wrists, I quickly wrapped my hands around her and hugged her tight. Rubbing my wrists, I quickly wrapped my arms around her and hugged her tight. She patted me on the back before pushing me away. "You have to wake up, quickly. Take the cane with you," she said, pointing to the item. Creel nowhere to be seen. I quickly nodded and grabbed the item. "Now what?" I asked, only for her to stab me in the leg with a metal nail filer, sending me screaming and suddenly waking up on the stone floor of the basement. I looked around, quickly in confusion. Had I just dreamt all that? Well, judging by the fact I had the cane in my hands, it must have been real. Great. Now I'm in some Nightmare on Elm Street shit. I looked around before I stood back up and held onto the cane, heading back upstairs and quickly closing the door behind me, rubbing my head. I looked around and saw that night was quickly falling. How long had I been down there? I shrugged it off and quickly made my way out of the burnt-out shop and off on my way. Making it home, I was scolded and hugged by my parents who had been worried sick over me. I said I was sorry and that I promised to come down and eat something after I was done with something I had to do in my room. Heading up there, I opened the door and looked at Tempe sitting on my bed. "You're in big trouble!" Up and examined it. "So he's in my dreams now or something?" I asked Tempe, who merely shrugged at me. As in the dark in this as I was, both of us were startled when a fucking rock came through my window. Landing on the bed, it was covered in blood. Looking over to the window, I stuck my head out to see who had done it, then instantly stuck it back and covered my mouth as to not scream. Standing on the street was the rotting corpse, and next to it was Creel. When I poked my head back out to see again, they were gone. Great. Now I have two angry voodoo creatures after me.